I am Zachariah Ali, author Walking with Spirit. Life is the cosmic battlefield of good and evil between God and Satan, two complementary opposing forces that shape our lives. God and Satan are like fraternal twins who don't get along and hate each other, but cannot do without one another because the work of each depends on the life and work of the other. They are complementary forces like day and night, or two sides of the same coin. Wherever one is, the other is never far away. Jesus Christ is the Prince of Peace, while Satan is the Prince of Chaos. Mankind would not have the notion or sense of good and evil without the two complementary and opposing forces working against one another. God acknowledged that his kingdom is not of this world, and his followers are loving, selfless, and forgiving of those that persecute and wrong them. Satan, on the other hand, is the domain of this world, but unlike God, Satan's followers rarely admit being its followers, but are known only by their actions and deeds. They are wittingly or unwittingly belligerent, selfish, and warlike in nature, arm themselves to the teeth with enough firepower to blow up and incinerate the world in minutes just to protect their worldly possessions. The prospect of annihilating our perceived enemies and adversaries to protect ourselves and possessions is more intoxicating than turning the other cheek. I was introduced to these complementary and opposing forces between ages 4 and 5 unawares. At age 4, my mother died of poison, and a year later, I encountered evil spirits in the bush that nearly killed me too. The poison was put into the family household pot of tamarind-flavored water, from which we drank and cooked, but only my mother suffered from the harmful effects of the poison and died within 4 months of ingestion. In a Western-style poison, the whole family of father, mother, and son would have died under suspicious circumstances, but a post-mortem examination might not have found the poison. The deaths would have been ruled suspicious from unknown causes. Such is the knowledge of poisons without antidote of my people and the dynamics of good and evil, or God and Satan. The works of God and Satan are intertwined and are sometimes indistinguishable by naive and gullible people. I was an innocent child that looked on as a trusted elderly neighbor and friend of my mother secretly slipped what turned out to be deadly poison into the family pot of water. It seemed innocuous when she lifted and replaced the cover over the pot without drinking from it. I did not have the common sense to tell my mother about what I saw for her to take precautions. The poison affected her when she tasted the flavored water that evening before cooking. The poison was so devastating that death was a relief. It ended the constant panting and groaning as the poison ravaged her internal organs. I did not know that my mother was on her deathbed, or that our room smelled like death or rotten meat. Maybe my sense of smell was not fully developed, but the smell of death sunk into my subconscious mind and resurfaced at 15 while an inpatient at a hospital. I romped around the hospital and entered the unrefrigerated morgue, and the smell seemed eerily familiar. I wondered about the eerie familiar stench of the morgue over several weeks, and it finally occurred to me that it was similar to our room before my mother's death. As at that age, I had not been close to another dead or seriously ill person and had not yet seen a mortuary, let alone enter one. My mother had been dead for over a decade, but the smell brought back my only memories of her. The day she was poisoned, agonies, death, and funeral at the village square. Similarly, I remember nothing about myself before the day she was poisoned. My life and effects started from the day my mother was poisoned. I became part of our extended family system after her death. My grandmother took me and my 4 or 6 month baby brother to her village, and we became her burden. I have tried to abide by the norms of the extended family system since I came of age. A year after she took us in, I experienced another interplay of God and Satan, which, in retrospect, demonstrated the impact the complementary and opposing powers of God and Satan on we mere mortals. One afternoon, I was sitting on a fruit tree, known as cigarette in my dialect, and enjoying some of the fruits. Then, unexpectedly, I heard drumming and singing that seemed to be coming from nearby. I cocked my ears and looked about me for the direction of the sound, and to my surprise, found that the music was coming from under me. A group of little men and women were drumming, singing, and dancing under the shade of the tree below me. I was scared at the sight of the strange little men and women who were no bigger than me. I hid in the tree and continued eating the fruits. I kept the peels in my left hand instead of discarding them under the tree so as to prevent betraying myself to the people under the tree. But my hands soon filled up, and one of the husks accidentally fell in the middle of them. They looked up just as I also looked down and locked eyes with them. There was consternation and confusion among them when they saw me, and despite their diminutive size, they reached into the tree and pulled me down. I took to my heels and ran towards home for dear life as soon as my feet touched the ground. They gave chase, and when it seemed they were about to catch me, I found myself running underground with the little people not far behind. Then, unexpectedly, I found myself running above ground again. But this time, the village was within sight. As soon as I entered the outskirts of the village, the little people vanished from behind me as mysteriously and suddenly as they had appeared under the tree below me. I fell seriously ill afterwards, and the medicine men and witch doctors could not help me with their herbal concoctions and potions. The family elders consulted fortune tellers and seers, and it came out that I was under the spell of some of their gods. They offered blood sacrifices by slaughtering fowls and sheep to appease them before I recovered from the effects of the spell. Until I was confronted with their findings, I had no idea that the little people were not human beings. I was scared by their unusual height and size than anything else, and apart from seeing them, I don't know what else I did to have offended them. And I don't know how I went in and out of the ground, but I remember the encounter as clearly as the day my mother was poisoned. This was a story I never told outside my immediate family, because even they were scared of me and thought that there was more to the story than I let on. In their hearts and minds, I must have had sinister motives or had a demonic spirit. Otherwise, the gods would not have attacked me. The death of my mother from poison and the encounter with spirits or gods literally marked my introduction to the world of God and Satan. God is a spirit, so is Satan. Behind the idols of clay and stone lurked spirits that normal eyes do not see. Similarly, behind the cross and statues of saints lurk spirits, but those spirits are more powerful. The spirit world must be like our secular world. People have degrees of power. There is a silver lining behind every dark cloud. 2 years after the death of my mother, or a year after the encounter with the dwarf spirits, my birth father sent for me and gave me the opportunity for education. My seeing eyes came alive in my new home, and over the next 4 years, I was a virtual prisoner on moonless nights. I had no idea I had seeing eyes when I started seeing ghosts and shadows, mostly after midnight on moonless nights. I have a weak bladder and use the toilet about 2 or 3 times a night. Whenever I went out after midnight on moonless nights in a town with no electricity, I saw ghosts and shadows lurking in the dark courtyard. The ghosts stood sentry at the same spot on moonless nights. I never saw them move, but the mere sight of them spooked me. As such, I never urinated beyond our immediate doorway after midnight on moonless nights. Our entranceway, therefore, reeked of urine unless scrubbed or washed away by rain. After more than a year or two, in which I never saw the ghosts move, I started wondering whether they were creatures of my imagination. So, one night, I attempted to go to the latrine area to urinate. I had to walk past a ghost that stood sentry at the door of the room opposite our room. We stared at one another, but it showed no sign of life until I crossed into its half of the courtyard, when it suddenly came alive and started moving towards me. I ran back into our room and banged the door behind me, and then cracked it open just enough to urinate through while peeping at the ghost. I saw it holding its ribs, as if laughing hilariously at my fear and timidity. I then concluded that the ghosts were not my imagination, but real otherworldly creatures or entities of the dark. The occupant of the room opposite ours was an idol worshiper, and the ghost or shadow that stood in the doorway guarded or protected him from malicious and evil entities. It disappeared after the tenant died. My seeing eyes faded away gradually, and by the end of 4th grade, I was completely freed or relieved of them. The encounters with gods or spirits of idols gave me a perspective on the first commandment that was different from my teachers and schoolmates, though I could not say it. I knew that behind the dumb idols lurk spirits that ordinary eyes do not see, and the reason God told the Israelites that he is a jealous God. Since God is a spirit, he does not want competition with other gods or spirits for our loyalty. With age and the benefits of education, I sometimes doubted my childhood memories and wondered whether the ghosts and spirits were figments of my imagination. But an encounter at 24 or 25 years of age proved to me, in no uncertain terms, that the ghosts and spirits were no figments of my imagination. During my second or sophomore year at the university, I went to my hometown during the Easter vacation and spent the nights with a friend, Lancono, in his family house. We binge drank almost every night and went to bed drunk. One night, I sobered up by 10 p.m. and tossed about in bed, unable to sleep. I became drowsy after midnight when cool breezes started blowing through the door and windows. Just as I was drifting into sleep, I saw from the corner of my eyes a ghost or shadow come through the door. It jumped into bed behind me like a date or girlfriend, and immediately I started shaking and shivering uncontrollably, as one suffering from high fever and felt I would die before daybreak. I therefore woke up my friend to take me to my mother's home where I could die and spare him the inconvenience of dying in his house. He accompanied me to my mother, who gave me her bed, while she and Lancono sat watching me shaking and shivering in bed. And just as I was getting drowsy and drifting into sleep again, I saw a woman in black from head to toe, breathing fire from the mouth and nose with flames blazing from her eyes. She stretched her arms towards me as if beckoning me to come to her. I tried to cry or shout for help, but could not. But my mother, sitting at the foot of the bed, saw me thrashing about in bed and thankfully woke me. Then, towards daybreak, at around 4 or 5 o'clock, Lancono again walked me to the hospital. But as soon as we entered the gates of the hospital, I felt completely normal. The fever, shaking, and shivering stopped as if it had never happened. I was left speechless and at a loss for words to describe what sent me to the hospital at that hour of the day. Anyway, I was admitted and given the 3-day Malarex treatment for malaria of the late 60s. That was my first direct encounter with an evil or satanic entity as an adult, which was not a dream or nightmare, and it won't be the last. The encounter dispelled my doubts and skepticisms about my encounter with ghosts during childhood. I was never quite the same after discharge from the hospital. The encounter left me with a mysterious heart and circulatory affliction over the next 18 to 24 months. Whenever I was drifting into sleep at night, my heart palpitated wildly, and my blood rushed through me with such a force that it seemed the blood would burst through my fingertips, ears, eyes, and nose. It was very scary, to say the least. The condition was a mystery because on 5 other occasions, I rushed to the college hospital at night, but felt normal as soon as I entered the hospital. Fortunately, the doctors didn't think I was a hypochondriac, but they could not diagnose or find the cause of the problem as long as I was at the hospital. I was given phenobarbital pills, a sedative to calm my heart palpitations to help me sleep. During the long or summer vacation of my 3rd year, I began questioning my sanity and wondered whether the mysterious illness only existed in my mind. I found no reason to explain why exams and tests by the doctor and laboratory could not find the cause of the illness. I therefore concluded that the hospital could not find the causes because the mysterious condition probably existed only in my mind, and the only option was to get rid of it from my mind. After that conclusion, I stopped paying attention and ignored my heart palpitations and blood racing through my veins when drifting into sleep at night, the only time I felt the conditions. On the first night, I lay on my back, stared at the ceiling, clenched my teeth, and repeated to myself over and over that the conditions were not real, but only in my mind, until I fell into an uneasy sleep. I did that every night, fell into uneasy sleep without a sedative, and that in effect was the cure of the mysterious illness. I did not show signs of fear and panic, no matter the severity of the palpitations or rate of blood racing through my arteries and veins. That was the beginning and end of the condition. When I went back to the campus at the end of the vacation, I was in much better condition than when I left. This taught me that the mind can affect matter. The encounter with the ghost that made me ill also demonstrated that not all ghosts and creatures of the dark are evil or malevolent. I shouldn't have been scared or spooked by ghosts I saw during childhood. There are evil and good ghosts, just as there are evil and good people. After college, I faced insurmountable financial problems and remembered the cautionary words of a passing fortune teller or seer over a decade earlier that my enemies would try to bring me down in the future. I wondered whether this was what the stranger foresaw. Everything happens for a reason. The problems motivated me to apply and win a scholarship for studies in Australia. The scholarship gave me the opportunity to seek the kingdom of God within me as solution for my problems. The interaction between God and Satan did not end after I found the peace of God and returned to my country. I felt invisible cobwebs creeping on my face, and arms like ants or insects during meditation and prayers in a room with smooth walls without cracks and crevices for insects and spiders to hide. Above all, new clothing items I made for sale instantly changed into faded old washout items the morning I was packing them for delivery to my potential customers. After that, sources of extra incomes that kept me financially afloat dried up, and I became so strapped for cash that I could barely feed my family. The problems had a happy ending. The witch whose witchcraft magically changed the luster of new clothing items into old and jinxed my luck was exposed by God. I got a side job from which I earned the highest fee of my entire professional appraisal career. But no amount of fasting, meditation, and prayers could restore the luster and shine of the faded washout clothing items. They were damaged for good. For details on these and other stories of the interaction between God and Satan, see the memoir on my journey of life titled Walking with Spirit.